Support for the Forward's Bintel Brief podcast comes from listeners like you and from Edward Blank, whose generosity makes this program possible. Gina.
Yes.
I got a burning question.
Yes, what is it?
Do you remember who gave you chickenpox as a kid?
No, I do not remember who gave me chickenpox, but I do remember the scent of the medicated Vaseline that I slathered on myself when I had it. Do you remember who gave you chickenpox?
I don't, but I am pretty sure that my mother did, because I have a vague memory of her holding a grudge for life against the parents of this person who sent her to a party or something when she infected us all.
Actually, Lynn, there's one other thing I remember, and that is that my dad used to make me bourbon hot toddies when I had chickenpox, and I remember that very clearly, too.
Wait, that is so not fair. I got a couple of scars, and you got refined taste in bourbon.
Hey, we know things have been hard lately. Want to talk about it?
Because we do. Email bintel@forward.com, BINTEL@forward.com, or leave us a voicemail at 201-540-9728. Again, that's 201-540-9728.
Today we're going to answer a question about something that has been on everyone's mind since the spring of 2020, COVID-19. And we know you can probably recite it by heart by now, but today on the show, first, Lynn and I will workshop our letter writer's question. Then we'll be joined by the Forward stellar archivist Chana Pollock. And lastly, we'll consult a guest. This episode, we're talking with Dr. Alison M. Buttenheim, a professor of nursing and health policy at the University of Pennsylvania, who also designs and tests interventions to change behaviors to curb the spread of infectious disease. So perfect for today's show. And now, for our letter. Dear Bintel Brief, I have been particularly cautious during the pandemic and never contracted COVID over the past 2 years. Only recently have I begun meeting friends out for dinner, and notably, traveling to visit family, specifically my nephew, who was a COVID baby. I made the decision to travel with a number of my other family members to finally meet him in person. This was our first considerable reunion, and shortly after arriving, one of my family members started coughing. I asked if they were feeling okay and if they had tested. They assured me it was just allergies. Fast forward 2 days later, I'm back in my apartment and I get the text that this person has just tested positive for COVID. And of course, a day later, so did I. I know that I can't be upset about the situation and keep being told it's just the reality of the times. But as someone who has been so cautious and has turned down so many get-togethers and in-person events since COVID started, I can't help but feel some unwarranted resentment towards this person for not taking the pandemic as seriously as I do. I don't want this to be something I hold over them going forward, but I'm not sure how to let this go. Signed, Sick and Tired. She, her, hers.
Oh, I so feel that. I made it till just not even very long ago, possibly after or because I went to a very funny show at one of the smaller windowless theaters inside Madison Square Garden. I did blame myself. I didn't torment myself, except I was super worried that I would be the reason that my son would be quarantined for his first couple of weeks of camp. He was not, but I would not have been able to live with myself.
This question reminds me of that meme that was circulating during the winter Omicron surge. It had Mario from Mario Brothers dodging spinning bars of fire and jumping over pipes with the words, "People who haven't caught COVID in December 2021. And I also got COVID recently as well and had some feelings about it. I'd been bouncing around major cities for 5 weeks straight. And at that point, I felt kind of resigned to having gotten it and a little vindicated that I actually did. Looking at my calendar, I was like, oh God, if I'm going to get COVID, it's going to be during this period. And it happened. But I think before we really get into it with this question from Sick and Tired, I think we should sort of do a little check-in on where things stand with Corona 2022, because it is a little bit different, and Sick and Tired isn't alone. There are lots of folks who are getting COVID this summer who haven't had it before. And, there are still tens of millions of active cases, but that's still far below where we were 2 years ago. And thanks to vaccines, we're also not being hospitalized or dying at the same rates that we saw during the first part of the pandemic. So clearly, we're in a different COVID reality than we were before, when it was very, very deadly. But I think the key to this question is in one phrase that Sick and Tired uses: unwarranted resentment.
Yep.
The letter writer knows, or at least feels the way that she feels, isn't rational. But the fact that she feels resentful nonetheless really surfaces some of those gnarly emotions that come along with contracting this particular disease. I think so much has changed since the beginning of the pandemic. Its virulence and deadliness has been mitigated by vaccines, and this country has gotten a new president. And even though so much has changed, our feelings haven't really evolved along with those new developments.
I think what has changed is the second half of her title is that we're tired.
Yeah.
Earlier in the pandemic, we like suited up, and we were like, it was sort of life during wartime. And now we're like, So I get it. I'd also say that even though our letter writer says she's angry at the relative who we gather gave her COVID, I feel like really she's mad at herself. After all this time, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? And this is for Sick and Tired. It reminds me of something my mom always said, which was never say to yourself, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I think she is so worked up, like I shouldn't be resentful. I shouldn't. But like making herself bad for feeling that way, that is more of the problem. So that's why I would say she's choosing the wrong battle, and stop trying to strong arm herself out of feeling resentful. You can't fight the feeling. Although maybe if she stops fighting the feeling, that will help it ease.
Yeah, thinking about the types of battles that we wage, it actually reminds me a lot of progressive movement politics right now, where I'm seeing the younger generation advocating or demanding change, fighting battles within their own organizations or their own institutions or with leaders in a moment where we clearly see that there are bigger fights to fight than with each other. And yet, people need a fight, and people need to win something. And when so much is out of your control, it's really tempting to find someone or something who's an appealing target.
We know all about this from Yom Kippur, as a matter of fact. If you look at Leviticus, you'll figure out that Jews had figured out a way to place their sins elsewhere in an act of expiation, in this case on a goat, or actually two goats. The story and the vocabulary and the translations evolved since then to where one goat was actually not sacrificed but sent away, carrying the sins of the community. So a later translation into English called it a scapegoat, which evolved into scapegoat. This is apparently the story. I like to think of the scapegoat as, of course, the goat that finds garlic scapes in the springtime.
You need a goat for that. It's really hard, actually, to find those things.
I know. We got the pig for the truffles. How do we find the scapes? So that is the solution that goes all the way back to Leviticus for basically not beating yourself up.
I think it's interesting that we have so many fascinating rituals in Jewish tradition, and the scapegoat is one of the ones that everybody, non-Jews and Jews alike, can get behind, because we all need someone to blame. And based on all of that orientation that Sick and Tired has with this family member, this is going to be the first time ever, I think, in Bintel Brief podcast history that my advice is, don't go talk to the person.
You heard it here.
I think that if she does, Sick and Tired is going to get more fuel for the fire about what she perceives as their irresponsible behavior and cavalier approach to COVID.
Yeah. Or maybe she'll even get facts that she didn't have before that don't validate her feelings, but just create a whole nother set of bad feelings, like guilt and I shouldn't have raised this and now I feel bad. And there's nothing to be gained. So Sick and Tired, first of all, historic response from us. Don't go talk to the person. Second of all, talk nicely to yourself. It's really okay. It's normal to feel resentful of that person. It may have also been inevitable that you got COVID. If it wasn't from this person, could have been from someone else. We hope it wasn't so bad for you, but we really want you to just chalk the whole thing up to how we live now, which is a time when we have to especially be kind to ourselves.
And now it's time for Wisdom of the Forwards Archive, transmitted by the sagacious Chana Pollock. Hi, Chana.
Hi.
Hi, Chana.
Hi, Ginna. Hi, Lynn.
All right, Chana, what have you found to help Sick and Tired get over her COVID-induced resentment?
So back in 1969, somebody who called themselves, they signed their letter, a New York reader, wrote in about what they called their Peckelsaurus, their bundle of issues. So here's a little bit of what they said. I'm writing to you about my husband with whom I've been married for some 30 years now. He's always earned well. We saved for our own home. We have enough savings. We have 3 great kids. They're already married. And now it's the 2 of us left at home. My husband recently had a mild heart attack and since then has become a completely different person. From the onset, he became a bit over-frightened, but after the doctor told him he was all right and that he could travel and do whatever he wanted to, but since then, he's remained frightened. He doesn't talk to me about it, but he's really cautious and he doesn't want to leave the house. He sits all day long and evenings too, reading the papers, listening to the radio, watching television. I'd like to see a movie once in a while. And I have to do it with a neighbor or a friend. If I say anything to him about going out of the house, he gets really upset. Weekends and evenings, I end up staying home with him. Doesn't bother me to go out alone over to friends, but I'm starting to feel ashamed. It's been 2 years now. He doesn't want to go anywhere with me and doesn't want to have anyone to come over. When a couple of friends came over, it seemed like a burden for him, and he barely talked. When they left, he complained to me that they stayed so long, and he complained about feeling worn out. I don't know what to do. I'll be waiting impatiently for your response. Gratefully, a New York reader.
Okay, clearly the letter writer from 1969 has some resentment. It's understandable. And the flip side is that when people go through dangerous, transformative health experiences, you just can't know. Either the physical or the emotional and mental ramifications will be after the fact. And it seems very unlikely that she'll get the husband she had the first 30 years back.
You're right that, who knows what kind of trauma or change any sort of physical ailment can cause, but this is a lot. So what did the forward say?
Okay, here's the forward's response. At this point, when you've taken care of your children, you deserve some pleasure when your husband won't change. We see that your complaints against him are absolutely right, and you should try, without fighting, with kindness, to work on him to change his habit of constantly staying home. It's completely right to spend some time at home, sitting in a comfortable chair, reading the paper or a book, watching television, listening to the radio, but within reason. Just as it's important to rest and once in a while laze around the house, it's equally as important to socialize and spend time in community. Your husband himself should understand that it's not good to isolate. Aside from that, he needs to consider you. It's not news to him that you like socializing and spending time with folks. You both need to compromise, and your husband needs to agree to go out with you twice a week to your friends, to your children, to a restaurant or a theater. If your husband is afraid from his mild heart attack, it's possible to see a reputable doctor who can give him a routine exam. If his heart is in good condition, the doctor can state that he has no reason to be anxious, and it's not necessary for him to constantly stay home. I think they really lay down the law on both ends. What I loved about the response, actually, aside from that take charge, well, go see a doctor.
Yeah.
But Chana, they already have that clean bill of health, according to the letter.
Yeah.
Sounds like he needs to hear it again.
He might need to hear it again, or maybe from somebody else. Sometimes the messenger matters, right?
Totally. I think also the in the context, if your partner brings it up to you, you hear it a whole different way, which is just what you pretty much pointed out.
I was also thinking, wow, this guy would have loved our quarantine.
Right.
I think we all probably knew folks who were, perhaps in our own estimation, careful to the point of too careful. So I relate to that frustration, and it does remind me of Sick and Tired. Everyone here to some degree is reckoning with a new reality, right? And in the case of the 1969 letter, she's reckoning with the new reality in her house. And in the case of Sick and Tired, she, like all of us, is continuously reckoning and re-reckoning with the new etiquette, the new rules, and also with, with our own feelings about them. Again, I would say it's always a matter of asking for what you need and also being kind to yourself.
Thank you so much, Chana, for stopping by with, again, amazing wisdom from the archive.
Thank you, Chana.
Thanks.
So how do you convince people who have only played Monopoly to play the new board game you grabbed at the game store? Is an escape room a good third date? Games and Feelings is an advice podcast about games, where you can get questions like that answered.
Join question keeper Eric Silver and a revolving cast of guests as they answer your questions at the intersections of fun and humanity. Since, you gotta play games with other people.
And we're talking every single type of game, from Dungeons and Dragons to laser tag. If you like what you hear and want to level up your emotional intelligence stat, subscribe now by searching for Games and Feelings in your podcast app. New episodes every other Friday.
I'm Rachel Fishman-Feddersen, publisher and CEO of The Forward.
And I'm Jody Rudoran, The Forward's editor-in-chief.
Together, we're reinventing the nation's leading Jewish news organization for today's diverse American Jewish communities.
We're carrying on a 125-year-old tradition of exposing anti-Semitism, holding power to account, and helping American Jews explore their identities, debate political issues, and connect to their culture.
And we're doing those things in new ways that resonate with today's Jews of every type and stripe across generations.
But we're a reader-supported nonprofit, and we can't do it without you.
Please give whatever you can to support independent Jewish journalism by going to forward.com/donate.
And now we're very happy to welcome Dr. Alison Buttenheim to A Bintel Brief. She is a professor of nursing and health policy at the University of Pennsylvania, and she designs and trials interventions to change behaviors to curb the spread of infectious disease.
Alison is a kindred spirit. She's also the co-founder of Dear Pandemic, a COVID-19 information campaign led by an interdisciplinary team of female scientists.
It's kind of like A Bintel Brief, but for the pandemic.
Alison, welcome.
Thank you so much. I am so delighted to be here.
And we are delighted to have you. Your bio at the University of Pennsylvania starts with a question. How can we use behavioral science to prevent infectious disease? And so I'd love to know the answer to that.
So it turns out that for a lot of infectious diseases, behavior matters a lot. I work on everything from HIV to vaccine acceptance to a disease called Chagas disease. That's a vector-borne illness in South America. And for all of those diseases, at the sort of last mile of prevention, what we do or don't do makes a big difference. And you can think about everything from masking during COVID, deciding to give your kid a measles vaccine, or agreeing to participate in a door-to-door insecticide spray campaign for a bug-borne illness. So I'm really interested in unpacking those behaviors, learning what gets in the way, the barriers, and then coming up with interventions. I work from sort of a nudge or behavioral economics perspective. So coming up with interventions that hopefully overcome those barriers and make those behaviors as easy and sort of frictionless as possible.
Quick question. When it comes to those diseases and the behaviors, do you see similarities in certain types of diseases and certain types of behaviors?
Totally. And I think, we try to sort of group behaviors by some of their characteristics. Like it's really different to try to change a one-off behavior versus trying to help someone develop a habit. Prevention behaviors are different from treatment behaviors. It can be hard to get someone to take an action to prevent a disease because the best case scenario there is that nothing happens. So we're asking someone to do something so that something doesn't happen in the future. And that's harder to motivate than, if you're actually sick and we want you to take a treatment.
So we do have one infectious disease that's sort of top of mind for all of us. And a few months ago, on April 27th, to be exact, one Dr. Anthony Fauci said, and I quote, "We're out of the pandemic phase." Is that how we're thinking about it right now? What did he mean? And in your world, do you experience us as post-pandemic?
So I wish I could ask Dr. Fauci if he was making a prescriptive or a descriptive statement. He may have just been saying, when you look around, and you go to the grocery store and you go on an airplane and, people are choosing not to mask and half the country still isn't fully vaccinated, it may just be a description that our society is kind of done with this. Epidemiologically, we're clearly, about to go into a B5 Omicron wave where we're going to see, the kind of hockey stick climb in cases again. It's different from 2020. We're not in that pandemic phase. We know a lot more. This has been stretching out, but we're certainly not in a phase where we don't have to think about this anymore, or we've kind of solved all the problems of trying to limit transmission.
Are you seeing in folks a sense of resignation around COVID? Like, oh, I'm gonna get it anyway. Is that part of behavioral changes that we're seeing in folks?
Absolutely. And I think that sort of inevitability phase, people hit it at different moments, but I think a lot of people are in that phase now. And, that's in part due to, yay, we have vaccines. Yay, they're doing a great job preventing severe disease and death. But some of it's also like, it's just not realistic to think that my 20-something kids are going to not get COVID when they're sort of out and about.
What are you thinking these days, and what are you seeing about just current expectations of pandemic etiquette all around, pandetiquette? What do you think is or should be what you might call common COVID courtesy these days?
I think what I would say is this is a moment in the pandemic where we are so highly influenced by the social forces around us. When there's like really, we're in like a severe phase and there's strong guidance from the CDC, you don't have to think as much about decisions. Maybe your city requires indoor masking, or your city has, closed schools down or requires contact tracing and does that. Now there's a lot of individual decision making to be done every minute, every hour. And one of the ways our brains do that, that really cognitively taxing decision-making over and over, is just to look around and see what other people are doing. So I am both very influenced if I just like run down to the corner store to grab a gallon of milk, I'll basically mask or not, depending on the first couple of people I see in the store. And I'm a behavioral scientist. Like I'm very, what we call sophisticated about like what's going on in my brain. And I'm still that influenced. When I'm feeling sort of noble and I have like cognitive resources and can be a little bit more forward thinking about this, I also try to be that person who has the mask on in the store. Like I know that my decision to mask up in any indoor space, for example, is also influencing other people. I am creating part of their choice environment because I know people are so highly influenced, like trying to do more of that. So that was a total dodge of your question, which is like, what should the etiquette be? Like the etiquette should be, we should all keep asking. But the challenges to that when we're in this sort of fatigued state and uncertainty, our brains really don't like uncertainty. And we try to turn any uncertainty or ambiguity into sort of 0, 1, 100%, 0% situations. And so I'm just like trying to be the like, I mask 100% indoors in part because people need to see other people doing that.
Alison, before we let you go, do you have any words of comfort for sick and tired?
I had 3 really quick thoughts. So one was, I was very struck that the person said, I know that I can't be upset about this situation, and I just want to give sick and tired license to be upset. It's okay to be upset about this. There's nothing that says you can't be upset. Another is the importance of regret in motivation. So we are very regret averse creatures. We really don't like feeling regret, and we don't even like the anticipation of possibly feeling regret. So the silver lining I would take from this is, this is not the last rodeo, and to make use of the regret that was experienced here to maybe change behaviors next time. And then the last one, it looked like, they gathered to meet the new nephew, and there was a family member who was coughing, and there was just sort of an ask like, hey, are you feeling okay? Are you tested? And they were reassured it was, it's just allergies. Like there are obviously, 3 more steps you could take in that situation, but that individual exchange is hard. So is there a way for a family event, again, to architect these choices like, hey, everybody is going to test before they're going to test the day before and the day of, we're going to do cadence testing. And, and we're sending you all 4 free tests before we come. The more stuff that's put in place, and so that we have to rely less on people's sort of individual decision-making and different risk preferences, the more we'll get sort of everybody to the desired behavior.
Thank you, Dr. Alison Buttenheim, professor of nursing and health policy at the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for joining us.
And Alison, where can we find Dear Pandemic? Tell us more.
Dear Pandemic is at dearpandemic.org, also on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. And we also have a Spanish language Facebook page called Querida Pandemia.
Amazing. Ginna, now that we've done the heavy lifting, do you know what I'm in the mood for?
A Bintel Blitz?
Exactly.
Yay!
Okay, here we go. I live with 3 other girls in an apartment. Last week, when my parents were over, one of them came into the living room wearing just a towel. Later, we asked her not to be naked when we have company over, and she reacted badly. Was I out of line? Concessions have to be made in communal living areas, right?
You were not out of line. Tell that girl to put some clothes on. Yes, it's a house y'all share, not the Riviera. And this is coming from someone who's naked a lot at home.
Women should have full sovereignty over their bodies. No one should police women's bodies. Also, put on some clothes in the living room. You got a pesky problem? Let us exterminate it. Write in to bintel@forward.com or call 201-540-9728.
Got it.
This podcast is a product of The Forward. Our editor-in-chief is Jody Redoran, and our CEO and publisher is Rachel Fishman-Feddersen. The show is produced by Wonder Media Network, and our producer is Alessandra Wallner. Our production assistant is Carmen Borca Carrillo. Our executive producer is Jenny Kaplan. Special thanks again to Edward Blank, whose generosity makes this show possible.